300 million years ago, there was no Europe, no Asia, no Africa, no Americas. There was only one colossal supercontinent, a vast, boundless land known as Pangea. Imagine standing on a cliff that stretches so far into the horizon, you can't see the end, not because of mountains or oceans, but because the entire Earth's land is fused into one endless piece. The ocean? It is not everywhere like today. It is a single monstrous expanse called Panthalassa, wrapping around this ancient world like a dark, endless moat. The air feels heavy, warmer than today, thick with moisture and scents you've never known. Ferns the size of houses sway gently in a humid breeze. Towering conifer forests rise like green cathedrals, and deep within them, the ground trembles beneath the footsteps of creatures beyond imagination. Some are gentle giants, lizard-like reptiles with long necks, grazing on the lush, untouched plant life. Others are fearsome hunters with sharp teeth and eyes that glint with a predator's intelligence. And yet, there are no birds singing above you, no grass beneath your feet, no flowers to brighten the fields. Those things haven't evolved yet. This is a raw, untamed Earth, still writing the first chapters of its story. The days are longer here. The planet spins just a little faster. The winds carry the scent of salt from the far-off coasts and the deep, earthy musk of ancient life. Storms roll in from the endless ocean, carrying rains that feed rivers carving through Pangea's heart. Volcanic mountains spit smoke into the sky, painting sunsets in fiery reds and golds. At night, the stars blaze with an intensity you've never seen, for there is no light pollution, only the raw, eternal darkness of a primeval sky. But beneath the beauty, there is a quiet tension. The Earth's crust is restless, straining against forces deep below. This world will not remain whole forever. One day, Pangea will break apart, scattering its pieces to form the continents we know today. But for now, this is a living, breathing giant, united, unstoppable, and magnificent. You are about to step back into this lost world, a place where Earth was young, wild, and whole. Before we begin this incredible journey through time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We explore the deepest mysteries of our planet, from ancient worlds to the farthest reaches of space, and this story of Pangea is one you won't want to miss. Join us, and let's walk through the past together. The Earth, you know, with its separate continents, oceans, and familiar coastlines, is just a brief chapter in an unimaginably long history. Long before humans walked the land, long before the first mammals even dreamed of existing, our planet was united as one. A single landmass, a single ocean, a single heartbeat. This was Pangea, the greatest supercontinent ever to exist. It was a place of extremes, where lush green interiors met scorching deserts larger than entire countries today, where prehistoric creatures ruled unchallenged, and the air was rich with life that has long vanished from our modern world. In this journey, we will step back in time over 300 million years, peeling back the layers of history to explore what Pangea truly was, how it formed, how it shaped life, and how it eventually tore itself apart to create the continents we live on now. We will walk through its deep forests, cross its endless plains, and feel the restless rumble beneath our feet that foretold its fate. This is not just the story of ancient Earth. This is the story of our planet's first great empire. The Earth was never meant to stand still. Beneath our feet, far below the soil, rock, and oceans, there is a restless heart, a molten engine of unimaginable power. It moves slowly, almost too slowly for us to comprehend, but with each passing year, it reshapes the face of our planet. To human eyes, the ground appears unshakable and eternal, yet in reality, it drifts like a vast ship on a fiery sea. This hidden movement is the force that gave birth to one of the most extraordinary chapters in Earth's history, the rise of Pangea. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the world was a very different place. The continents we know today, Asia, Africa, Europe, the Americas, Australia, did not exist as separate lands. Instead, Earth's land was scattered in fragments, drifting apart and colliding in slow-motion battles that lasted tens of millions of years. To stand in that ancient world would have been to witness landscapes that felt alien, strange shorelines, unfamiliar skies, and creatures unlike anything that walks the earth today. It all began with the quiet march of tectonic plates, enormous slabs of Earth's crust floating atop the mantle, the molten layer beneath. These plates are the skin of our planet, constantly shifting, driven by currents of heat from deep within. Imagine the surface of a pot of thick soup gently boiling. Pieces of bread floating on top slowly drift toward each other, crash, and merge. That is how the land masses of ancient Earth moved, except the process took not minutes, but millions of years. Over time, these fragments, once separate continents like Laurentia, Baltica, Siberia, and Gondwana, began to inch toward one another. Each collision was a slow-motion catastrophe, and a miracle at the same time. Mountains rose from the crushing force, as rocks folded and twisted like clay under unimaginable pressure. The ancestors of today's Himalayas, Alps, and Appalachians began their long journey toward the sky in these violent embraces. Volcanic eruptions lit the horizon, their molten rivers carving new landscapes. This was not a sudden event. The creation of Pangea spanned more than 100 million years. At times, the plates paused, locked in a tense stalemate. Other times, they surged forward, driven by the unstoppable convection currents swirling in Earth's mantle. Every inch they moved shaped the planet's climate, oceans, and the fate of its living things. Entire ecosystems vanished in the chaos of collisions, while new ones took their place on freshly formed coastlines and mountain valleys. By around 335 million years ago, the drifting pieces of Earth's surface had come together in one colossal embrace. The result was breathtaking, a single vast supercontinent that stretched from pole to pole. Its size was beyond comprehension. From its western edge to its eastern shore was a journey so long it would take months to cross, even if you could travel without stopping. And surrounding it was a single, endless ocean, Panthalassa, a dark blue wilderness that wrapped around Pangea like a massive ring. From above, if one could have floated in the ancient skies, Pangea would have looked like a giant scar on the planet's face. Its jagged coastlines, endless deserts, and deep forests formed one continuous body, while the ocean beyond churned with massive currents. This was a world united, but it was also a world under strain. The same forces that had built Pangea were already whispering of its destruction. The climate of this newborn giant was extreme. With so much landmass gathered together, the interior regions were far from the cooling influence of the sea. Summers in the heart of Pangea were blisteringly hot, and winters were bitingly cold. Vast deserts dominated its center, while coastal regions enjoyed lush forests and fertile plains. This diversity in climate shaped the life that would call Pangea home. from amphibians lurking in rivers to massive reptiles that roamed the open plains. And yet, the story of Pangea's birth was more than just the meeting of rocks and soil. It was the expression of Earth's restless soul. Deep beneath its surface, the mantle churned endlessly, pushing and pulling at the crust above. The plates didn't move by choice. They moved because the Earth itself is alive in its own way, always changing, always seeking balance. If you could have stood in that ancient time, you would have felt the ground's slow breathing. The horizon might have been marked by mountains, so new they still steamed from volcanic earth. Rivers carved their first paths through freshly raised valleys. The air would have been thick with the scent of resin from towering conifers and the metallic tang of volcanic dust. The soundscape was alive. The distant crack of rock as tectonic forces shifted, the low rumble of magma far below, the crash of waves against brand new coastlines. For life, these changes were both a gift and a trial. Creatures had to adapt to the new landscapes, new climates, and new challenges. Some thrived in the spreading forests, others in the deserts. Still others perished, unable to keep pace with the shifting world. Every living thing, from the smallest insect to the largest reptile, was a passenger on this vast, drifting landship called Pangea. The unification of Earth's continents brought together ecosystems that had once been separated by oceans. Species that had evolved in isolation now crossed paths, sometimes peacefully, sometimes with deadly consequences. Predators found new prey, and prey found new predators. This mixing of life would shape the evolutionary path for millions of years to come. But for all its magnificence, Pangea was never permanent. The forces that had drawn it together still moved beneath its feet. Like a great heartbeat, the Earth's mantle pulsed, sending ripples of motion through the crust. Fault lines snaked across the land, invisible but full of tension. Deep beneath the ground, magma pooled in chambers, waiting for the moment when pressure would demand release. Still, for now, in this moment in deep time, Pangea stood whole. It was the greatest stage Earth had ever set, and life, in all its strange and beautiful forms, was ready to play out its drama. Mountains would rise and crumble. Rivers would carve canyons. Deserts would swallow forests, and forests would reclaim deserts. And all of it would happen atop this single, united body of land, a supercontinent born from fire, pressure, and the slow dance of time. The birth of Pangea was not just a geological event. It was a reminder of something greater, that our planet is not a static rock drifting through space, but a living, changing world with its own rhythm and story. And in the quiet creaks of shifting plates and the distant roar of a volcano, you could almost hear the Earth speaking, telling the tale of how it brought itself together in one magnificent whole. If Pangea was the beating heart of the ancient world, then Panthalassa was its endless breath. This was no ordinary ocean. It was not just a body of water, it was the only ocean. A single, unbroken expanse that wrapped completely around the supercontinent like a great blue crown. From any point along Pangea's coast, you could set sail in one direction and never touch land again until you returned from the other side. It was a world without separate seas or familiar coastlines, a planet where almost all water belonged to this one colossal, mysterious realm. Standing on the shores of Pangea and looking out at Panthalassa would have been an overwhelming sight. The horizon would curve into a deep blue void, the waves stretching as far as your eyes could see. There was no sense of across the ocean, because there was nothing across it, only more water, rolling endlessly beneath the blazing sun and shimmering moonlight. The sound of Panthalassa was constant, the crash of enormous waves, the hiss of receding tides, and the deep, rhythmic pulse of swells born in distant storms thousands of kilometers away. But this ocean was more than just a backdrop. It was alive, restless, and in many ways it controlled the fate of Pangea itself. Its waters were driven by powerful currents, vast rivers within the sea that carried heat, nutrients, and storms across the planet. Unlike today's oceans, where continents break and redirect the currents, Panthalassa's waters could flow almost without interruption. Gigantic loops of water, some stretching thousands of kilometers, circled endlessly, distributing warmth from the equator toward the poles and sending cold waters sinking into the depths before drifting back again. These currents shaped the climate of Pangea in ways that were both nurturing and merciless. Along the coasts, warm waters brought life, rich fisheries, coral-like reefs, and thriving marine ecosystems. The air above these regions was often humid and warm, feeding rainstorms that drenched the forests and kept the plant life lush. But deep within Pangea's interior, far from Panthalassa's influence, the story was different. The ocean's cooling touch could not reach the landlocked deserts at the center of the supercontinent. Summers that were searing, and winters bitter, with little rainfall to soften the extremes. The winds that swept across this ancient earth were shaped by Panthalassa's moods. Without multiple continents to break their path, they could travel immense distances, gathering power and moisture. In some places, they brought gentle sea breezes that cooled the coasts. In others, they arrived as violent, unstoppable tempests, storms so large they could cover an area bigger than modern Europe. When they crashed into Pangea's shores, they brought towering waves and pounding rain, reshaping coastlines in a single night. The weather patterns of this world were unlike anything we know today. Modern storms are tempered by geography, slowed by the jagged shapes of continents. But in Pangea's time, storms had the freedom of an open ocean. Tropical cyclones, the ancient ancestors of today's hurricanes, could spin across Panthalassa for weeks, feeding on its endless warmth, growing stronger and more dangerous with every turn. When these monsters reached land, their fury was unmatched. Winds tearing through forests, rain turning rivers into raging floods, and waves swallowing the beaches whole. Farther south and north, the winds could be equally fierce, but carried different characters. Polar winds, cold and dry, could sweep across the ocean surface and slam into Pangea's coasts, bringing sudden freezes to areas that only weeks earlier had been warm and green. These shifts could happen quickly, leaving ancient life scrambling to adapt. Beneath Panthalassa's surface was a world of shadows and giants. The open ocean teemed with life adapted to its vastness. Armored fish, enormous sharks, and marine reptiles that glided through the water like living submarines. The deep blue was a realm of both abundance and danger, where predators hunted in the dim light and schools of ancient fish darted together for safety. The cycles of life here were closely tied to the ocean's currents, which delivered the nutrients that kept the food chain alive. When the currents shifted, entire marine ecosystems could bloom or vanish in a matter of years. The relationship between Panthalassa and Pangea was intimate and constant. Every breath of wind that crossed the land had touched the ocean first. Every raindrop that fed the rivers began as vapor lifted from its waves. The ocean moderated the planet's overall climate, even if it couldn't soften the extremes of the supercontinent's center. And over millions of years, its restless movement helped shape the very future of the land, slowly gnawing at coasts, carrying sediments, and preparing the stage for the geological changes to come. But Panthalassa could be cruel as well. Its storms and floods could erase coastlines overnight. Its currents could strip away rich coastal habitats and replace them with barren sands. And when the Earth's mantle shifted and volcanoes erupted along the ocean floor, tsunamis would race outward in all directions, striking the shores of Pangea with unstoppable force. For the creatures of that time, the ocean was both a giver and a taker of life. To live on Pangea's coast was to feel the constant presence of Panthalassa, its beauty, its danger, and its endless mystery. On calm days, the surface shimmered like glass under the sun, a mirror reflecting the clouds. On stormy nights, the horizon vanished into blackness, the only light coming from flashes of lightning far out to sea. The sound of waves was a lullaby to some and a warning to others. In the grand story of Earth, Panthalassa was not just the setting for Pangea as rise. It was a character in its own right. It shaped the climate, dictated the patterns of life, and left scars on the land that can still be traced today in the rocks and fossils of our modern continents. Without it, Pangea would have been a very different place. And yet, like all things on Earth, Panthalassa too would face change. The same forces that had united the land would eventually pull it apart, creating new oceans and new currents. But in the age of Pangea, it was the ocean that ruled, a single, vast, and untamed empire of water, holding the planet in its deep blue embrace. If you could open your eyes on a warm morning in the age of Pangea, the first thing you'd notice would be the silence, not the absence of life, but the absence of familiar sounds. There would be no bird song in the trees, because birds did not yet exist. No buzzing of bees, because flowering plants had not yet evolved. Instead, the air would carry the slow rustle of giant ferns, the creak of towering conifers swaying in the wind, and the distant calls of creatures unlike anything alive today. The landscape of Pangea was green, but in a different way from the modern world. There was no grass under your feet. Grass was millions of years in the future. Instead, the ground was carpeted in mosses, low ferns, and strange spore-producing plants that looked more like living sculptures than anything we see today. In some places, the ferns grew taller than a man, their fronds spreading out like giant umbrellas. Above them rose conifers, ancient relatives of today's pine and cedar trees. They reached for the sky, their straight trunks topped with clusters of needle-like leaves. Their resin scented the warm, moist air with a sharp, earthy aroma. In more tropical regions, you might find cycads, thick, palm-like plants with tough leaves and sturdy trunks, some older than the human species itself. These plants were survivors from even earlier ages, adapted to both heat and drought, able to cling to life where others could not. This green world was the stage for an extraordinary cast of animals. Amphibians, descendants of the first creatures to crawl from the water, thrived along the rivers, swamps, and lakes. Some were small, darting through the undergrowth to snatch up insects. Others were enormous, with broad, flat heads and wide jaws lined with sharp teeth, lurking just beneath the surface until an unsuspecting prey wandered too close. Sharing the land with them were early reptiles. These were not yet dinosaurs, but their ancestors, creatures built for the warmth and dryness of Pangea's climate. Some had sleek, lizard-like bodies and hunted for insects among the roots of ferns. Others were heavier, with armored plates running down their backs for protection. There were even massive predators, their muscular legs carrying them swiftly over the open plains, jaws ready to strike. But the true giants of this world were the archosaurs, a group that included the forebears of dinosaurs, crocodiles, and pterosaurs. These animals were beginning to rise in dominance, their strong limbs and efficient lungs giving them an advantage over the more sluggish reptiles of the past. In the dense forests, smaller archosaurs stalked quietly, their eyes scanning for movement among the foliage. On the open plains, larger ones chased down their prey, their footsteps thundering across the hard, dry soil. Life in Pangea was shaped by its geography. Because the continents were united, there were few natural barriers to stop animals from spreading across vast distances. A predator that evolved in the far north could slowly migrate south over generations, adapting along the way. Prey animals could follow rivers for hundreds of miles, seeking new feeding grounds. This constant mixing of species made Pangea a place of fierce competition and rapid evolution. The ecosystems of this ancient supercontinent were as interconnected as the land itself. Along the coasts, warm, humid climates supported dense forests and wetlands, home to amphibians, fish, and insects the size of small birds. Moving inland, the forest thinned into open woodlands, where reptiles basked in the sun and hunted among the cycads. Farther still, in the deep interior, vast deserts stretched across the horizon, broken only by occasional oases. Here, survival was a daily struggle, with only the hardiest plants and animals able to withstand the searing heat and lack of water. Every creature had a role to play. Large herbivorous reptiles shaped the landscape by consuming vast amounts of plant life, keeping the forests from becoming impenetrable. Carnivores kept the herbivore populations in check, preventing overgrazing. Insects, though different from today's, pollinated some plants and broke down fallen vegetation, returning nutrients to the soil. Amphibians thrived in the wetter areas, feeding on insects and small fish, while themselves serving as prey for larger predators. But this was also a world of extremes, and the climate could be unforgiving. In some years, heavy rains from Panthalassa storms would flood rivers and swamps, creating brief explosions of plant and animal life. In other years, drought would grip the land, shrinking the waterways and forcing creatures to travel far in search of water. Those that could not adapt or move would vanish, leaving only bones behind. Night in Pangea brought its own magic and dangers. Without city lights, the sky blazed with stars, the Milky Way stretching in a dazzling arc overhead. Moonlight glistened on the still surfaces of ancient lakes, while in the forests, the chirping of primitive insects filled the air. Predators hunted under the cover of darkness, moving silently through the ferns. The sudden splash of a reptile diving into the water, or the hiss of a hidden hunter, was a reminder that danger was never far away. The diversity of life in Pangea was both a gift and a challenge. Species that had evolved in isolation were suddenly thrown together. Some adapted by changing their diets or behaviors. Others fought, tooth and claw, for territory and survival. Over millions of years, this constant struggle forged new forms of life, some of which would go on to dominate the planet for over 150 million years, the dinosaurs. And yet, as powerful as these creatures became, they were still bound to the land and climate of Pangea. The same forces that had created their world, the shifting plates, the restless mantle, the vast ocean, were already shaping their future. One day, the land would break apart, isolating populations and setting the stage for even greater diversity. But in this moment, Pangea was a living, breathing giant, and its forests, deserts, and swamps were alive with creatures that would leave their mark on history. To walk through Pangea was to step into a world both alien and familiar, a place without grass or flowers, but filled with green life. A place where the ancestors of modern animals took their first steps toward greatness. A place where every river, every forest, every desert was part of one vast, united ecosystem. It was a reminder that life is always adapting, always finding a way, even in the most ancient and untamed of worlds. Deep in the heart of Pangea, far from the cooling touch of Panthalassa's waves, the land changed into something far more unforgiving. Here, the air shimmered with heat during the day and froze like glass at night. No gentle sea breezes reached this place. No clouds drifted in from the ocean to bring rain. The center of the supercontinent was a vast, dry wilderness, a desert so enormous it could swallow modern countries whole. To stand here under the midday sun was to feel the very breath pulled from your lungs. The heat was relentless, pressing down like a heavy weight. The ground cracked underfoot, split by years of drought. Fine dust swirled around with every gust of wind, coating skin, scales, and leaves in a thin, pale layer. In the distance, jagged ridges of rock rose like the bones of the earth itself, their edges sharp against the cloudless sky. This harsh interior was not completely lifeless, but life here was rare and precious. Plants had adapted to survive on almost no water, their roots stretching deep into the ground in search of hidden moisture. Low, tough shrubs clung to the soil, their leaves small to reduce the loss of water. Some cycads grew here too, their thick trunks storing every drop they could, standing like stubborn sentinels against the wind. The animals of this place were masters of endurance. Small reptiles hid beneath rocks during the day, emerging only in the cool of dawn and dusk to hunt for insects. Larger herbivores migrated constantly, following the memory of ancient waterholes that still clung to life in scattered oases. These oases were like jewels in the desert, patches of green where palm-like plants swayed and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. To reach them could mean the difference between life and death. Predators here were cunning and patient. Some lay in wait near the rare watering holes, knowing that sooner or later, prey would come to drink. Others stalked through the sparse vegetation, their bodies lean and strong from long journeys across the desert. Every kill was precious in a place where food was scarce. Seasonal changes brought new challenges. In summer, the heat baked the land until even the rocks seemed to glow. Streams vanished, leaving behind dry channels that twisted through the landscape. In winter, the temperature could plunge overnight, turning the sand brittle with frost. The animal had to adapt not just to the extremes themselves, but to the sudden swings between them. Dust storms were a force of terror in this land. They could rise without warning, a wall of brown and red sweeping across the horizon. The wind roared, lifting sand high into the air until the sun itself was blotted out. For hours, sometimes days, the storm would rage, stripping leaves from plants and burying smaller creatures beneath drifts of dust. When the storm passed, it left behind a changed landscape. Dunes shifted, trails erased, and the weak buried in silence. Despite its dangers, the interior deserts of Pangea were not barren wastelands. They were home to some of the most resilient creatures of the time, survivors whose descendants would one day inherit the earth. Small amphibians found ways to burrow deep into the ground, waiting for rare rains before emerging to breed. Insects adapted to the heat with reflective shells that bounced away the sun's glare. Even the predators learned patience, conserving energy until the perfect moment to strike. Migration was one of the most important survival strategies. Herds of plant-eating reptiles would travel vast distances, their instincts guiding them toward the promise of water and fresh plants. These migrations were dangerous journeys. Predators followed the herds, picking off the weak or the young. The desert itself seemed to test every traveler, offering no shelter from the sun or storms. Yet the will to survive pushed life onward, step by dusty step. The struggle for survival shaped everything here, from the way plants grew to the way animals hunted, traveled, and raised their young. The desert was a teacher, rewarding those who could adapt and punishing those who could not. Over generations, creatures became faster, hardier, and more resourceful, carving out an existence in one of the harshest environments Earth has ever known. But there was also a strange beauty in this place. At dawn, the horizon glowed with colors no ocean sunrise could match, deep purples fading into gold as the sun climbed higher. At night, the air cooled and the stars burned brighter than anywhere else on the planet, the Milky Way stretching unbroken across the black sky. In those quiet hours, the desert felt almost peaceful, as if the land itself was resting after a long day of battle with the elements. The harsh interior of Pangea was a reminder that even in the most extreme conditions, life will find a way. Every living thing here carried a story of resilience, of adaptation, of refusing to give in. These deserts forged survivors, and in the great story of Earth, it is often the survivors of harsh times who go on to shape the future. At the center of Pangea, beneath layers of ancient rock, the Earth's heart was restless. The crust here was not a quiet shell, but a living, breathing skin stretched over a core of molten fire. And in certain places, the skin cracked open, releasing that fire into the world in great, violent bursts. Towering volcanic ranges rose from the land like blackened scars, monuments to the planet's raw, untamed power. These volcanoes were not like the gentle, cone-shaped peaks we sometimes picture today. Many were vast, sprawling monsters, chains of mountains that could run for hundreds of miles. Some were shield volcanoes, their sides sloping gently under the weight of countless lava flows. Others were jagged stratovolcanoes, their peaks sharp and unstable, constantly reshaped by explosions and collapses. And in between them lay smoking vents and fissures where the earth's molten blood seeped to the surface. Life near these giants was always lived under a shadow, the shadow of uncertainty. Days could pass in silence, the mountains sleeping, their slopes covered in forests and strange prehistoric plants. But then, without warning, the ground would tremble. A deep rumble would roll through the valleys, like the growl of some enormous beast waking from slumber. Birds and small reptiles would flee, their instincts screaming. And then, the world would change in an instant. When a major eruption began, it was a spectacle of destruction and creation. The peak would tear itself open, hurling chunks of rock into the sky. Clouds of ash and steam would billow upward, climbing into the upper atmosphere until they blotted out the sun. The sky would turn from blue to a strange, sickly orange, then to black. Ash would fall like snow, coating everything, the trees, the rivers, the backs of fleeing animals. Breathing became difficult as the air filled with choking dust and the smell of sulfur. From the heart of the mountain, rivers of lava would pour forth, glowing bright orange and yellow against the darkened world. These molten streams moved with deceptive slowness, swallowing forests, grasslands, and rivers in their unstoppable advance. Plants would catch fire instantly. Animals that could not escape would be trapped in a hellish wave of heat and stone. The ground itself seemed to melt, reshaping the land into new hills, ridges, and hardened black plains. But the destruction didn't stop at the mountain's base. Volcanic eruptions could change the climate of the entire supercontinent. The ash and gases they threw into the sky spread far beyond the eruption zone. Sulfur dioxide mixed with water vapor high in the atmosphere to form reflective particles that bounced sunlight back into space, cooling the land below. This volcanic winter could last months or even years, bringing sudden freezes to regions far from the volcano. Crops, or what passed for crops in the prehistoric world, could wither, herbivores could starve, and predators, in turn, would go hungry. Yet, paradoxically, volcanoes were also creators. The same lava that destroyed forests eventually broke down into rich, fertile soil. Minerals from the deep earth, iron, magnesium, phosphorus, were released into the environment, feeding new plant growth once the land cooled. In the years after an eruption, green life would often return in a rush, as if the land itself was eager to heal. New ecosystems would form, sometimes more diverse than the ones that had been lost. There were places where life and volcano coexisted in a delicate balance. Some animals learned to use the warm slopes of dormant volcanoes as nesting grounds, where the heat of the earth helped incubate their eggs. Plants grew quickly in the mineral-rich ash layers, attracting herbivores and, in turn, predators. It was a constant cycle of destruction and renewal, death and rebirth, all driven by the heartbeat of the planet beneath their feet. But not all volcanic events were the same. While some were relatively localized, others were catastrophic on a scale that defies imagination. Massive flood basalt eruptions could open up giant cracks in the Earth's surface, pouring lava not just from a single peak, but across entire regions. These eruptions could last for centuries, releasing enough lava to cover areas the size of modern continents. The gases they spewed out could warm the planet over the long term by filling the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, triggering greenhouse effects that would reshape Pangea's climate. To stand before one of these vast lava fields was to see the raw bones of the earth laid bare. The surface shimmered with heat, even years after the flows had cooled. Jagged black rocks stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional stubborn plant pushing through a crack. It was a reminder that Earth as surface was never truly still, that even the most ancient landscapes were temporary. Some volcanic events during Pangea's time may have contributed to mass extinctions. The end of the Permian period, the greatest extinction event in Earth as history, has been linked to enormous volcanic activity in what is now Siberia. These eruptions released vast amounts of toxic gases, poisoned the oceans, and changed the atmosphere so drastically that nearly 90% of species vanished. If you had lived in those days, you would have seen skies blood red with ash, oceans turning acidic, and forests dying in days. Yet even after such devastation, life endured. The volcanic heart of Pangea was both a destroyer and a giver, a paradox that has defined Earth for billions of years. Without volcanoes, the planet's surface would have long ago hardened into an unchanging shell, its air stripped away by the solar wind. Volcanoes helped create the atmosphere we breathe today, the continents we walk on, and the soils that feed life. The people of today may fear volcanoes for their explosive power, but in the age of Pangea, they were simply part of the fabric of existence. Every living thing, from the smallest insect to the largest reptile, was shaped by their influence, directly or indirectly. The mountains smoked on the horizon, a constant reminder that the ground beneath your feet was alive. At night, when the eruptions were visible from far across the plains, the glow on the horizon must have been both beautiful and terrifying. Streams of molten rock shone like rivers of gold, while fountains of lava leapt into the air like fireworks from the underworld. The rumble of the earth was a sound you could feel in your bones. And always, in the silence between eruptions, there was the knowledge that it could happen again, at any moment. The great volcanic heart of Pangea was not a single place, but a vast, shifting network of fire and stone. It shaped the land, the climate, the air, and the very course of life's evolution. And in doing so, it left its mark on history in ways still written into the rocks we study today. It was a reminder that the story of Earth is not one of peace, but of constant change, and that life, no matter how fragile, has an uncanny way of finding its place between the fire and the ash. Deep beneath you, where light cannot reach, the Earth's molten layers swirl like a slow, simmering cauldron. The crust here, which feels solid and stable underfoot, is actually a restless mosaic of plates, each piece gently nudging, pulling, and grinding against its neighbor. In this hidden world of heat and pressure, the seeds of change are quietly planted. Even as Pangea stands whole and imposing, the very forces that created it are setting in motion the process that will ultimately tear it apart. The transformation begins not with a rumble or a crack, but with pressure or slow, relentless buildup of energy between Earth's deep layers. You might imagine standing in the middle of Pangea, surrounded by silent forests or deserts that stretch toward the horizon. Beneath your feet, there is tension, something deep enough to reshape continents. The plates above are rigid, but they strain under the weight of the mantle's force, flexing ever so slightly. These tiny shifts are invisible to the eye, but they carry immense power like the faint prelude of a storm that you haven't yet felt. Over millions of years, stress gathers along weak zones in the crust. These are not empty spaces, but hidden lines, old faults, healed scars, ancient boundaries between landmasses that once collided. These zones are Earth's pressure valves. As mantle forces press upward, the crust bends and tugs along these lines. Rock fractures, minerals shift, and temperatures change subtle at first, building patiently. Slowly, the surface responds. It stretches, ever so minutely, like an ancient scar reopening. Rocks crack not in an explosive bang, but in soft, grinding whispers. In places where the crust is thin, fissures form. These tiny cracks can run for miles, snaking across the land like veins seeking release. Initially, They are just whispers across the landscape, barely noticeable. But given time, they widen, deepen, and connect, forming the earliest fractures that will eventually become the rifts of a breaking supercontinent. Imagine tracing one of these fissures with your fingertips, feeling the jagged line under a still, smooth plane. It is a scar that carries the story of Earth's inner struggle, of hot mantle pushing up and ancient rock giving way. Rainwater and wind might sneak in, eroding the rock and widening the crack. Plant roots seek moisture and wedge their way into gaps, further prying them open. Life, ever persistent, becomes an accomplice in the slow fracture of a giant landmass. As these cracks grow, the land begins to change. Small valleys appear along the rift's sunken lines amidst the flat terrain. What was once continuous green forest or dusty desert now reveals fissures that might haze shadows of moisture or cooler air. In wetter regions, these valleys can fill with water, becoming narrow lakes or marshes. Future birds might one day dip their wings there, but for now, amphibians or small reptiles could claim them as refuges, little pockets of life amid cracking land. The formation of these early rifts isn't a spectacle. It's quiet, patient, and full of tension. It could take millions of years before hunger or drought, mountain weight, or mantle shift finally forces a crack to widen enough into a visible rupture. Yet each tiny movement is part of a gathering storm Earth preparing to remake itself. Occasionally, you might feel the ground shiver long before any sign of volcanic fire or collapse. These are tremors along the emerging fault, the crust shifting slightly in response to deep stress. To the creatures around you, the tremor might feel like the growl of a lurking predator, a faint warning that the world is not as steady as it seems. In the forests, trees sway. In the desert, the dust rises momentarily before settling again. Life senses the stirrings. Beyond the rifts, the land begins to respond in other ways too. The ground might tilt where the crust is thinning. Gentle slopes form by sinking central blocks, the beginnings of rift valleys. Rivers follow the new lines of least resistance, changing course toward these growing depressions. In wetter lands, new wetlands might form, soft blankets of green amid fractures in the crust. All the while, underground molten rock responds. In places where the crust is weakest, magma may intrude, shafts of molten stone pushing upward, melting bedrock at its edges. You may not see smoke or lava yet, but rock above warms, minerals transform, and the scent of sulfur can be faintly carried on the wind. This hidden fire fuels further fracturing, as heat and pressure combine to break rock and weaken the crust further. The pressure of splitting land can even awaken volcanoes. Dormant peaks may begin to grow restless, with magma picking new pathways along the spreading rift. Steam might hiss from newly formed vents, or soils emit faint odors of minerals that weren't there a moment ago. Life may sense these changes. Animals might avoid these areas, or seek the warmth of volcanic soils. Everywhere you stand on Pangea, change is being quietly written in the ground beneath your feet. As time passes, multiple rifts can form across the supercontinent. These cracks might run in different directions, carving the first outlines of continents that will emerge. Some might grow faster, fed by steady mantle upwelling. Others may stall, sealed by shifts in pressure. But the result is inevitable. Earth's surface begins to crack and stretch, and the vast unity of Pangea begins to fray from within. Every creek that follows a rift, every valley that widens, and every tremor is a reminder of Earth's living nature. The same forces that once gathered continents are now turning them apart. The crust is Earth's skin, thin, fragile, and ever responsive to the engine beneath. If you could watch this in time-lapse, eons flashing before your eyes, you would see a landmass slowly sag, crack, and break. You'd see green forests interrupted by growing valleys, rivers flowing into new lowlands, and animals adjusting their paths. Deserts shift, new lakes appear, and the ground that once felt permanent begins to reveal its unruly shifting soul. This process is the beginning of the end for Pangea, but also the first chapter of the world to come. Out of these fractures, new ocean basins will form. Continents will drift apart. Sea levels will reshape coastlines. Climates will shift. Life will face new challenges and adapt in new ways. Yet at this moment, the land is still whole. The fractures are small. The rifts are hidden. But if you listen with care, you can feel them Earth's first footsteps toward change, its opening notes in the symphony of breakup and creation. And in the silence that follows each tiny shift, you sense that something magnificent, something unstoppable, has quietly begun. At first, nothing seems different. The forests still stretch endlessly. The desert still lies silent under the sun. Rivers keep carving their paths to inland seas. But deep beneath the surface, the great supercontinent is already being pulled apart. Pangea, once an unshakable giant, is now under invisible stress from within. The fractures that began as hairline cracks have grown wider, longer, deeper. They have become wounds that no amount of time can heal. It happens slowly, so slowly, that no creature alive could notice the change in their lifetime. But over millions of years, the rifts spread, and the land begins to pull away from itself. In the north, a massive split begins to open, dividing Pangea into two vast continents. This will be the birth of Laurasia, which will drift toward the northern hemisphere, and Gondwana, which will journey south. The division is not a sudden tearing, but a stretching, a steady pull that widens into great valleys and eventually into entire seas. Along the central rift, molten rock from the mantle rises and fills the gap, hardening into new crust. This is how new oceans are born, not with a single wave, but with fire and stone. First, a narrow, shallow basin forms, filled with brackish water from rainfall and rivers. Over time, the basin deepens and floods with salt water as the edges of the continents move farther apart. The waters rush in like a slow tide measured in ages. This is the beginning of the first new ocean between Laurasia and Gondwana Sea that will widen into something far greater. With the birth of oceans come coastlines, and with coastlines comes change. Once inland areas are now lapped by waves. Beaches form where there was once nothing but dry earth. Salt water carries new life into these newborn shores. Algae, plankton, and small marine creatures begin to explore these shallow environments. Birds do not yet exist, but reptiles adapted to life near the water's edge take advantage of the new habitat, hunting in tidal flats and basking in the warm coastal sun. But for every place that gains an ocean, another loses land. As the continents split, volcanic activity intensifies along the rift lines. Volcanoes rise from the sea, building islands. Some erupt violently, casting ash high into the sky, darkening the sun for weeks or months. The air smells of sulfur. Ash drifts for hundreds of miles, settling into layers that will one day be read like pages in Earth's diary. Life in the shadow of these volcanoes struggles. Forests burn, rivers are choked with debris, and the air grows heavy. Yet in the long arc of history, even this destruction will give way to renewal, as volcanic soils prove fertile for the plants that return. The separation of Laurasia and Gondwana reshapes the face of the earth, but it also reshapes the climate. When Pangea was whole, much of its interior was dry, far from any ocean's moisture. Now, as the land breaks apart, the new coastlines bring rainfall deeper inland. Forests spread where deserts once ruled. At the same time, ocean currents begin to flow along new paths between the continents, redistributing heat around the planet. Some regions grow warmer, others cooler. Seasonal patterns shift. Creatures must adapt or perish. In Laurasia's north, cooler climates develop in some regions, giving rise to lush temperate forests. In Gondwana's south, parts of the land move closer to the polar regions, where winters grow harsher and summers shorter. The planet becomes a patchwork of different worlds, each with its own rhythm of life. Migration patterns shift as animals follow the climate zones that suit them. Herbivores roam new grasslands, while predators adapt to stalking along coastlines or in dense forests. The oceans themselves become highways for life. What was once a single superocean around Pangea now begins to fragment, and with that fragmentation comes the isolation of species. Marine life that once swam freely around the giant continent now finds itself confined to separate basins. Evolution takes new directions. Fish and marine reptiles diverge into different forms depending on which side of the split they inhabit. In this way, the breaking of Pangea doesn't just move land, it changes the very course of life's story. The slow drift of the continents is not without drama. Massive earthquakes shake the land as plates adjust to new positions. Mountain ranges rise where collisions occur along the edges of the drifting landmasses. Rivers carve new paths in response to the shifting terrain. Inland seas appear and disappear. Entire ecosystems are uprooted and reformed. Imagine standing at the edge of one of these growing seas. You would see cliffs where land is broken and dropped away, revealing fresh rock faces untouched by weather. You might watch molten lava cooling into black stone as it meets the sea, sending up plumes of steam. You would smell the metallic tang of minerals newly exposed to the air. You might hear the distant, deep roar of the earth itself, the grinding of plates, the low thunder of volcanic eruptions, the hiss of steam vents. For the creatures of this world, the transformation is both opportunity and danger. New coastlines offer abundant food, but also the threat of sudden storms and tidal surges. Volcanic islands provide fresh land for colonization, but also the risk of fiery destruction. Forests expand into new regions, but other areas are lost to the rising seas. The splitting of Pangea creates winners and losers in the great game of survival. Over millions more years, the rift between Laurasia and Gondwana grows into a vast ocean, wide enough that the opposite shores can no longer be seen. The climates of the two continents continue to diverge. In Laurasia, warm currents from the equator bring humidity and life to its coasts. In Gondwana, certain regions grow arid again as shifting winds carry moisture elsewhere. The planet's heartbeat, its system of plates and mantle currents, never stops. The continents continue their slow dance, sometimes drifting closer, sometimes farther apart. The ocean basins widen and deepen, creating new circulation patterns that will one day set the stage for ice ages, tropical ages, and everything in between. And so, the giant is broken. Pangea is no more. In its place stand two vast worlds, Laurasia and Gondwana, each with its own destiny. This was not just a geological event. It was a turning point in the history of life. Without the breakup of Pangea, the diversity of climates, landscapes, and ecosystems we see today might never have existed. The world became more complex, more varied, and in many ways, more beautiful because of this slow, unstoppable separation. But this is only the middle of the story. The continents will not stop here. Laurasia will fracture further. Gondwana will split into pieces. Oceans will come and go. The land will never again be whole, but the echoes of Pangea's unity will remain, written in the shapes of coastlines, the patterns of mountains, and the shared fossils of species long gone. The earth has turned a page, and a new chapter has begun. Even though Pangea broke apart hundreds of millions of years ago, it has never truly vanished. Its ghost is etched into the surface of our planet, hidden in the shapes of our continents, the patterns of our mountain ranges, and the stories locked deep within the rocks beneath our feet. When you look at a modern world map and notice how the jagged coastlines of South America and Africa seem to fit together like puzzle pieces, you are seeing the faint memory of a time when they were one. Those matching shapes are not a coincidence. They are the scars of a great separation, proof that these lands once touched and shared the same skies, rivers, and forests. If you dig deep into the Earth's crust, in places scattered across the globe, you will find rocks of identical age and composition on continents now separated by thousands of miles of ocean. A mountain range in eastern North America shares its geological fingerprint with mountains in Scotland and Norway, telling us that they were once part of the same chain before being torn apart. Fossils of the same species, plants, reptiles, even tiny creatures, are found in layers of rock on continents that today lie on opposite sides of the world. These are whispers from Pangea, fragments of a lost land still speaking to us across time. But Pangea as legacy is not only written in stone and fossilized bone, it is also alive in the very arrangement of life today. The split of Pangea sent species drifting apart on different continents, forcing them to adapt, evolve, and become unique. This is why kangaroos bounce across Australia, why lemurs leap through the forests of Madagascar, and why the mighty lions of Africa never crossed into South America on their own. The borders of oceans born from Pangea's breakup became natural barriers, shaping the destinies of plants and animals for millions of years. Without Pangea's formation and destruction, the diversity of life we see today might never have existed. Even our human story is tied to this ancient supercontinent. The tectonic shifts that began with Pangea created the environments where early mammals and eventually humans could evolve. The mountain ranges formed during its collision changed wind and rainfall patterns, creating fertile lands that became cradles of life. The minerals forged in those ancient collisions became the resources that later fueled human civilization. When we mine for iron, copper, or gold, we are often harvesting the treasures left behind by Pangea's violent birth and breakup. Pangea also taught us that the Earth is not a static stage, but a restless, moving, breathing entity. It showed us that continents are not fixed. They drift, merge, and break apart over deep time, carrying entire worlds with them. It reminds us that change is inevitable, and that even the largest, most enduring landscapes can be reshaped by forces we cannot control. This truth humbles us, but it also inspires awe. And perhaps the most remarkable part of Pangea's legacy is that it is not over. The continents continue to move today, inch by inch, pushed by the same tectonic forces that once united and then shattered the supercontinent. Scientists believe that in another 200 to 300 million years, a new supercontinent may form, a successor to Pangea. It might look completely different, but its creation will follow the same slow, unstoppable dance of Earth's plates. Our planet's history is not a closed book. It is a story still being written, and we are lucky enough to be here to read its pages. Pangea lives on, in the land beneath our feet, in the seas that separate us, in the creatures that share our world, and in the destiny of our ever-changing planet. We may be small in its grand timeline, but by understanding it, we connect ourselves to something vast, ancient, and eternal. There was a time when the Earth was whole, not whole in the way we see it now, dotted with continents, wrapped in oceans, but whole as a single massive landmass surrounded by one endless sea. That world, Pangea, was both powerful and fragile. It was powerful because it gathered the planet's strength in one place, uniting mountains, rivers, deserts, and forests into one great body. It was fragile because deep beneath its surface, the same forces that had brought it together were already preparing to tear it apart. In this truth lies the great paradox of our planet. Nothing, no matter how vast or seemingly eternal, escapes change. When we think of Pangea, we might imagine a still, unchanging giant, but in reality, it was alive in its own way. Its mountains rose and eroded. Its deserts shifted like restless waves of sand. Its forests grew, burned, and grew again. Its creatures migrated across its endless stretches of land, sometimes thriving, sometimes dying out. And beneath it all, Earth's mantle churned slowly, like a vast ocean of molten rock, pushing and pulling on the rigid plates above. The Earth never stopped moving, and it never will. The breakup of Pangea is not just a chapter in geology. It is a reminder of the deep, patient rhythms of time. We humans measure our lives in years, decades, perhaps a century if we are lucky. But the Earth measures time in millions of years. It sees continents as we might see clouds drifting, merging, breaking apart. To us, the breakup of Pangea feels like an ancient, irreversible event. To the planet, it was just another shift, another step in a dance that has been going on for billions of years. And yet, Pangea matters deeply to us because it shaped the world we know. Without its birth and destruction, there would be no Atlantic Ocean. The climates that nurtured early mammals might never have formed. The very arrangement of our continents, the coastlines we walk along, the mountain ranges that mark our horizons, is the result of that ancient fracture. Pangea was not just a stage for life. It was a sculptor, carving the conditions that made our present possible. It also left behind a lesson about fragility. The animals and plants that once roamed Pangea lived in what must have seemed like a stable world. But the slow pulling apart of the land changed everything. Species were cut off from one another. Climates shifted, ecosystems collapsed, and rebuilt themselves. What was once familiar became foreign. Life had to adapt or vanish. In that way, Pangea's story mirrors our own age, a time when climate, ecosystems, and even the shapes of our lands are changing before our eyes. The power of Pangea's memory lies in perspective. When we feel that our world is fixed, that mountains will always stand, that seas will always stay where they are, we need only look at the evidence written in stone to know this is an illusion. Our planet is a master of transformation. And while we often speak of the Earth as if it belongs to us, Pangea reminds us of the opposite. We belong to the Earth, and we live by its terms. This truth can be humbling, but it can also be comforting. If the Earth has endured the collision and breakup of supercontinents, the rise and fall of entire climates, and the extinction of countless species, then it can endure what is happening now. The question is not whether the Earth will survive. It will. The question is whether we will survive with it. The forces that broke Pangea are still here, and they still move us, whether we feel them or not. When we stand at the edge of the ocean and watch the waves crash, we are watching the legacy of Pangea in motion. When we climb a mountain, we may be walking on rock that once lay deep inside the heart of that supercontinent. When we hold a fossil in our hands, we may be holding a creature that lived in a time before our continents were separate. Pangea is not gone. It is scattered, its pieces drifting beneath our feet, reminding us that we live on a planet that is always becoming something new. So let us remember the Earth that was whole, not because we wish it back, but because its story is our story. It teaches you patience. It teaches us resilience. It teaches us that beauty can come from change, even when that change feels like loss. The next supercontinent will form long after we are gone, but in this moment, we are part of the same great chain of transformation that began billions of years ago. Pangea's time has passed, but the Earth continues to write new chapters. And if we listen closely to the shifting ground, to the whisper of wind over ancient stone, to the stories locked in the bones of long-dead creatures, we can still hear the echo of that world whole and vast beating quietly beneath our own. And so we come to the end of our journey, but the story of Pangea is not truly over. The continents may have drifted apart, the oceans may have carved new boundaries, but the fingerprints of that ancient world are everywhere. They are in the curve of South America that fits the coast of Africa like a puzzle piece. They are in the matching mountain ranges split by seas. They are in the fossils of creatures found on lands now separated by thousands of miles. Pangea lives on, scattered across our maps, whispering to us through stone and time. We often think of change as destruction, but Pangea reminds us it is also creation. From its breakup came the world we know, the seas that cradle life, the climates that sustain it, the continents that hold our homes. We are the children of a restless planet, born from the shifting of plates and the slow dance of land and water. Every step we take is on the back of a world that has been remade countless times. Standing here, in our own fragile moment of history, we can look back at Pangea and see both a warning and a promise. A warning that nothing lasts forever, that even the mightiest landscapes can fall apart. But also a promise that from every ending comes a new beginning, and life, in all its stubborn beauty, will find a way to adapt. So the next time you feel small, remember this. You are standing on the ruins of a supercontinent, on ground that once connected all life into one. You are part of a planet that has been whole, broken, and whole again in ways we can barely imagine. And just like the Earth, you carry within you the strength to endure change, to adapt, and to keep moving forward. This was the Earth that was whole, and its story is far from over. If this journey through time stirred something in you, if you felt the heartbeat of the ancient Earth and saw the world in a new light, then don't let it end here. There are countless more stories buried in stone, written in the waves, and hidden beneath our feet, waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe now and join us as we travel deeper into the mysteries of our planet's past, the wonders of its present, and the secrets that might shape its future. Because every time you return, you not just watching a video, you're stepping into an adventure across millions of years. The Earth has so many tales to tell, and together we'll make sure none of them are forgotten.